Well, Happy New Year. How did you spend your holidays? No, how did you spend them? You did spend them, you gave something, you received something. It was an exchange, it didn't just happen. Even if you said, I'm just staying at home this year and closing the windows and turning off the lights and eating pizza and drinking a glass of wine, you chose, you spent. The disciplines of liberal religion, any discipline, is about how we spend ourselves. They're activities that we consciously or unconsciously sometimes choose that shape us and form us and shape and form our world in response. Now, I have to confess, I had never heard of spiritual formation until about 3 years ago. The concept of formation, what was that? Shortly after I started serving here, Fred said, I want this church to be a center of liberal spiritual formation. And I want you to help us get there. Whoa. I guess I better figure out what it is then, huh? So for the last couple of years, I've been spending every other week at the Dominican Center as part of their spiritual formation program. And I'm not the only Fountain Streeter who's been there or who is there. Learning more about what it means to intentionally engage in traditions that shape us and form us, that guide our lives, and then trying to put those into a practice. Discovering what disciplines I want and choose to shape me. Now, as the words of Gandhi pointed out, a lot of us don't like to even use the word discipline. Unless we're thinking about maybe an exercise regime or a diet. But even that might be a little bit too much, too rigid, too steady, too stiff. Discipline. What's that? And as he points out, disciplines can be necessary tools to create containers and communities, to shape and form conversations, individuals, and lives. And so we've begun to talk here at Fountain Street Church about the disciplines of liberal religion. And over the next 4 weeks, we'll be exploring what we've claimed as those disciplines. Next week, we'll talk about worship as a discipline of liberal religion. And we'll talk about service and study and finally sacrifice. All of these acts that we choose consciously or unconsciously that shape us and form us. And it's that bit, that shaping and forming, that I want to talk a bit with you about today. Because that's the goal of all of these disciplines. There's an outcome hoped for. There's something we're heading towards. Sometimes we know, sometimes we think we know, sometimes we're surprised. This formation is not primarily an exterior formation. No, we are formed by many forces from the outside. Forces that shape us around gender and class, around income and race, around sexuality and age, around ability, many of those categories we talked about, those identities that we said welcome. This kind of formation acknowledges those realities, but this formation is not about those. It's not about forming forces from the outside as much as it is forming forces from within. Formation is a process we engage in through disciplines that carve out a space for us, a space in us. Like the reading from Sirach suggested, a space where wisdom can reside. Now, in your bulletin this morning, you should have received a little packet that has a white square of paper and some instructions. You've also got that thanks to the Dominican Center. No, they didn't give it to me, and they didn't tell me to do that. What they did was they created a space where they asked us to say, what is an image of spiritual formation for you? And those origami balloons sitting there on the chancel table, which you have instructions for now in your hand, that's what came up for me. That formation is taking something that looks like one-dimensional, flat, and making intentional choices about how to fold ourselves. See, in my mind, spiritual formation isn't about adding something. It's not about taking something away that's there that's not right. The disciplines of liberal religion are about observing who we are, how we are made, and then saying, how can I shape myself? But it's not just about shaping ourselves, and that's why this image of the balloon so speaks to me. Because once you've got it all folded, right, it's still pretty flat. Until breath blows in and opens up something. The Hebrew scriptures speak of ruach, breath. It's a word that gets translated as the Holy Spirit in Christian scriptures. The disciplines of liberal religion, worship, study, service, and sacrifice help us to fold ourselves, to shape ourselves by observing how do we move. Like the missing piece, sometimes we have to work hard to flip ourselves up on end and then flop over. But if we want to get moving somewhere, we start by noticing where we are and then effortfully setting off and allowing ourselves to bend, to shift, to reshape. And then something else happens. Call it mystery, call it God, call it nature, call it alchemy. Something breathes into us through relationships, through inspiration, which literally means breath, and opens a space for something new, a form, a shape that didn't exist before. This, I think, this is what the disciplines of spiritual formation and liberal religion do. They shape us, they form us, they create a new space in us that wasn't there before. Now, one of the unique things about the way Fountain Street does spiritual formation, and as Fred said, if you're here at the beginning of a new year either thinking, I should bring some friends, or maybe it's your first year and you've resolved, or first day, you've said, I'm going to church this year. Here's some things to think about. One of the differences of liberal religion and the way that it happens here at Fountain Street is we may say, here are the disciplines, but we won't prescribe the content. We say worship is a discipline of liberal religion, but we acknowledge we worship differently.